안녕하세요 여러분, 김지윤입니다. 제가 지금 갤러리이자 카페인 굉장히 특별한 곳에 와 있는데요. 한국에서도 굉장한 인기를 끌었던 책이죠. 나는 메트로폴리탄 미술관의 경비원입니다 라는 책을 쓰신 패트릭 브링리 씨가 한국을 방문을 하셨어요. 그래서 한번 인터뷰를 하려고 와 있습니다. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
So is this first time for you to visit Korea?
It's my first time.
Okay, so how do you like it so far?
I'm having a wonderful time. Everyone's been so kind. I've seen some beautiful things. I went to the palaces, eaten good food, and I'm meeting readers, which is so cool. Everyone is so enthusiastic, and it's magical.
So you must feel like a rock star or something.
So yes, all of this is very surreal.
So we have to talk about the book. Basically, this is the book about your experience as a guard at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. But before that, you were actually working for The New Yorker, which is a very prestigious magazine and very intelligent magazine. And then you decide to leave that company and move on to be a guard at the Metropolitan Museum. So could you please tell us about the moment you decided to do so?
So yes, while I was at The New Yorker, I got that job right out of college, and it felt like an amazing place to be. And in some ways, though, that was dangerous because it made me feel as if, I've made it. Here I am. Aren't I special up in this big skyscraper? When the reality was, I was so young, I wasn't writing for the magazine. I was just working in their events department. And, what would I have written for the magazine? I hadn't lived much life. I hadn't thought kind of original thoughts, but I sort of, naively thought that having a fancy business card and email address was something that really meant something in the world. But then while I was there, my brother Tom got sick, and all of a sudden I was spending so much time with him, quiet rooms in hospitals. And it felt like such a contrast to life inside of an office, and the sort of glitz and the glamour of that felt kind of trivial by comparison to this sort of momentous thing going on, which is this young man who's ill, who's suffering, and who faced up to his suffering with just kind of incredible bravery and simplicity. And the whole thing felt very sorrowful, but also very beautiful, being in this space with just your family. And then when my brother died, I didn't want to sort of rush back to some office job, clicking and clacking on a keyboard and answering emails and things. I was sort of speechless and shell-shocked and wanted to kind of stand back and think about things. And I found this job where I could, stand and think my thoughts all day in this beautiful place, the Met.
But why does it have to be a museum, and particularly the Met?
For me, I knew about this place. I love art. I've loved art for a long time, even though I didn't study it. I knew the Met as a place where you could go in and spend time with the old master painters, and then ancient Chinese art, and then art from West Africa, that is about how big this world is and full and diverse and old. And it just seems like this mammoth place that can take you away from the small little cares of the world. So I applied for the job and I got it.
I mean, your book is not really, your book do talk about the art, but it's not really about the art and the history. So you're talking about the art, but at the same time, that you also talk about how you connect your feeling, emotion, and your life to the particular art pieces. And I think people found the solace in there. While I was reading a book, there's one moment that I cried. This is after your family buried your brother. You visited Philadelphia Museum of Art with your mother and your sister. After, just seeing all the pieces, and you found your mother crying in front of the Pieta. And then, I don't know why, but I just burst into tears. Something tragic happens to me, I couldn't even shed a tear somehow. It felt like I'm numbed. And then, after a while, something came to me. It's a really small thing that touches my feeling. And then I start to cry. I don't know, maybe I feel empathy with her at that moment. So that was the part I really cried a lot. I guess a lot of readers in Korea had that kind of moment while reading your book.
Yeah, I mean, something like that Pietà picture, I think reminds us that was painted in the 14th century in Italy. And in some ways that it seems like a long time ago or seems like a distant place, but those paintings are then of even longer ago. It's meant to be Jesus in the first century. But what are they dealing with? They're dealing with life and death and suffering and loss and the same kind of things that we're still dealing with. And I think that sometimes when you go to an art museum and you look at things like that, you feel less alone, or you feel like there are other people who have reflected on this in ways that you can learn from. Or even if you don't think that their reflections quite match up to what you think about life and death and suffering, you can still use that as a tool for you to think your thoughts and feel your feelings. And it just makes a place like an art museum just fantastically rich with possibilities when you want to be thinking through these questions.
So there must be some piece of art that you can relate to most. So what is that?
There's a very beautiful painting that I spent lots of time looking at, which is The Harvesters by Peter Bruegel. It's this big 16th century landscape painting. Right. You know, landscape painting in Eastern culture goes very far back, but in Western painting, really, landscapes would only be used as sort of decoration for a religious scene kind of going on in the foreground. And it was quite revolutionary for Bruegel to paint in 1565 these landscapes that were just the world that he saw around them. And this one at the Met, which is this huge window, you know, it kind of, you can stand in the corner of a gallery like I would do all day. And the longer you look at the thing, the more you can kind of believe that it actually pokes a hole through the Met and looks off into this other world. And its color harmonies are so gorgeous, and it just sort of blooms and just kind of gains a richness. But then also, the people are so relatable and sympathetic. These peasants that are just conked out under a tree and, you know, sharing a meal together. And it can just feel like a picture that's about this great big world, and then these little people that are in this great big world and how they, you know, relate. And I don't know, it feels like it's about everything.
Is there any piece of art that you really like other than the Metropolitan Museum?
Oh, of course. I mean, all over the place. I mean, today or yesterday morning, I went to the National Museum of Korea here in Seoul, and I spent forever in this room of quiet contemplation with these two bodhisattvas from, I think, the 7th century, maybe one the 7th century, one from the 8th century. I walked in the room, and they have this big, quiet room dedicated just to them. And when I first saw them, I was like, oh, geez, you know, they are quite beautiful. But I kind of didn't understand why they're a cultural treasure of Korea and what sort of the big deal of it is. So I said, all right, well, let me spend a lot of time in here. And I sort of leaned on the wall as if I was a guard. And I spent all this time, and they just grow. They grow in the presence of them. You just kind of feel in their shape, in their character, in the kind of the bit of the smile, the bit of the tension in the toes, and how the, you know, one leg is up in the lotus position and one leg is down because they're sort of poised between their Buddha selves and entering the world. And you can see all of that. And it kind of, you feel like all of a sudden you're getting a bit of the music of 17th century Korea. Was, you know, captivating. That's what I love.
Well, some people say that we can easily get emotional when you're listening to music or seeing the play or dramas and everything, but it's so hard to get emotional by looking at the pictures or paintings because it doesn't give you the story or the drama. But somehow people get really emotional and even shed tears in front of Mark Rothko. I don't know why. It's just simple rectangles, but still.
Yeah, I mean, those paintings in particular, like, if you know Mark Rothko, it's these big sort of fuzzy, colorful rectangles. But if you like really just go in and spend time just looking at that and quieting yourself down and really letting it, it's a physical response because they're so color saturated. And if you let that sort of color enter, it almost like vibrates your insides. It's almost like staring into the sun. It's a very strange feeling. And I could see some people having that response mix in with whatever they're feeling inside can kind of jar something loose. But it's very important when you look at anything, whether it's Rothko or anything, that you have to get past, you know, this instant snap. Because if you look at a picture the same way you would look at, you know, a poster, and you just say, oh, I see it, I get it, it's a bunch of fuzzy rectangles, then it's never going to do what it has to do on you. Like, it's just not going to work. But if you really want a Mark Rothko painting to work on you, you have to do nothing. You have to stand in front of that thing and quiet your mind and sort of clear your thoughts and give it the time to do its work. And then at some point, also you have to give back to it, because sort of seeing things involves our eye, but it also involves our mind. And if you are thinking thoughts and having emotions and feelings and things, that's valid. That's part of this give and take that you're having with the work of art. So I think when you said that, a work of art is just still, unlike a movie, it doesn't have a climax or something. That's true, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a dynamic relationship going on as your eye moves through different details in the picture, as your mind moves, as you focus on different things, as you bring a different perspective to it. If you look at something that's ancient, for instance, sometimes it feels like it was made a very long time ago by people who are very different than me, and that is interesting. And then sometimes your perspective flips and you think, well, but this was still made by a human being who in some ways is very similar to me. I mean, that stone is 300 million years old, and this ancient Roman, that was just 1800 years ago. That's a blink of an eye in some sense. And that sort of flipping of perspective is something that can happen in lots of different ways and can make your relationship with a work of art sort of dynamic.
And also the part about the ground room or art room, you say, that there's a ton of other artworks, but probably cannot really go upstairs and be shown to a lot of people, but still they are really wonderful art.
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe that's me, or maybe that's people, most of the people, you have the wonderful quality, but somehow we feel like we are not really up there and getting the spotlight, but still waiting for my good qualities can be shown someday. I felt like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. I mean, if you take the Met, right, and you sort of sort all the people, like here are the fancy people who wear the fancy suits and, have the impressive jobs, or, they're curators or they're the director or something. And then here you have the custodians and the security guards. It's not as if those people at the top are the most impressive people in ways that really matter, in a sort of deep, wise sense, in things, the Buddha or Jesus or wise people would talk about, which is like goodness and generosity and all those things. That's distributed everywhere. So there's going to be someone who's a guard who's a total jerk, and there's going to be someone who's a guard who is just the most selfless, wonderful grandmother of 15 you can imagine. And then same thing with the executives, So like if you're searching for sort of talent and human, the most worthwhile and noble aspects of human beings, you can't just look at the people who are wearing the fancy suits, because, that's just one sliver, one tiny type of person that rises to that level.
But still, you're a great artwork, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there any other museum you can recommend in New York? Of course, there's a bunch of other museums.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, there are a million, of course. The big ones, the MoMA and the Whitney and the Guggenheim. The American Museum of Natural History is extraordinary. It's in some ways a funny sort of the kind of sister to the Met, because they're on right across from each other on Central Park. And here is this great museum of art, and then here is this great museum of nature. And in some ways, between those two museums, you can feel like, well, that just covers everything.
And just in front of the Metropolitan Museum, there's a Noe Gallery, the woman in gold.
Yeah. So that's like German and Austrian art.
Right. And the Frick, I thought the Frick was on the renovation. Is it finished?
Yeah, so it's going to reopen soon in the spring. So the cool thing about the Frick is you experience the art, and he's got Rembrandts and Vermeers and Titians. But also, if you're not particularly interested in art, you're in just this amazing place, this amazing building.
So it's come to think of it, those the end of the 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, that's probably the period that a lot of culture and art was blooming in the New York City.
Yes, the Gilded Age.
Right.
So after the Civil War, there's lots of money sloshing around. And, when the Met was built, Central Park was very new. You can picture all these tiny little trees in Central Park. They hadn't grown tall yet. And there was nothing on the Upper East Side, like as far as buildings and stuff. The subway didn't extend up there. This was like the way northern wilds of Manhattan. But the Met was really New York, all those industrialists and things being like, we need our Louvre. If America is going to be a proper country, if we're going to, compete with London and Paris and the big boys, we need to act like that. But of course, America doesn't have, a royal family or an aristocratic collection. So they didn't have anything. They didn't have any art when they built this thing, basically. So just piece by piece by piece, they had to sort of gather this stuff. And the Met is all these buildings that have been built and built and built and smashed into each other over the course of 150 years. So that history is quite interesting, how it all happened with a process.
I don't know. I really like the periods. I read a lot of books about Gilded Age. It's so amazing, and it's really dynamic. I mean, it's New York City, Manhattan is always energetic, but that period was particularly so mesmerizing.
Yeah. Yes, a lot was getting built. A lot was happening.
And a lot of those, the guy like Frank, he's not most popular guy at his period.
No, I think he was not the kindest man. And he was, he was sort of a strike breaker and against the unions and
Right, but those people actually left great artworks and collections of art, like Frick did, Getty did.
The Met has, there are 7,000 JP Morgan objects in the Met. He was president of the Met for a while, and he spent the whole last years of his life spending all that money he made in banking, mostly buying pieces of cathedrals and things, and also manuscripts, which are in the Morgan Library. JP Morgan collected just all of these manuscripts from the Renaissance up until the 20th century.
So they were villains of their period, but still they left a lot of artworks and collections.
I mean, it's always complicated. Like, it's the same thing with the art itself. Like, it's oftentimes empires that are creating art because they have the money to have a bunch of people who are just making art, So I don't know if you call them villains or not, but it's very often the people, the big cultures that are stomping on other cultures that oftentimes are leaving behind these masterworks that can happen for sure.
So is there any plan to write another book in the near future?
Yeah, so I have a couple projects right now. I adapted this book into a play, a one-man play. It's not totally final yet, but in the spring, it looks like it's going to open at an off-Broadway theater and run for a couple months at least of me performing. So I have to memorize 90 minutes of lines.
Oh my gosh.
I already did it. I did it once. So I'm focused on that. And then I am in early stages of writing another book. I don't have it totally worked out what it's going to be, but it's going to be actually some of the things we were talking about looking, about seeing, about kind of some practical advice about how that's done, but then also taking it outside the art museum as well. So, I spent all this time looking at art. You learn some things about that, but I want to continue to push myself to look at, not just paintings and statues, but also mountains and trees and people on the subway. And like, how can we feast upon these things visually? One thing you see all the time is that everyone is photograph obsessed. I understand that, and I have nothing against people taking pictures. But I do think that we also should take a walk and feel pleasure from just seeing, just the experience. And how do we do that? Because I think it allows for a shift away from some of the ways that we think in modern times that I think drive us a little crazy, that we always have to be accomplishing something, or with your phone, you have to be capturing it for later. No, you don't capture for later. Like if you see a rainbow, just enjoy the rainbow. But you got to learn how to do that. So I'm writing a book exploring some of those things, but I don't have quite worked out how exactly it's going to work.
Well, any last advice for those Korean visitors to Metropolitan Museum?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to give, I think, sort of two pieces of advice, which is that I think the first thing that you want to do at the Met is just wander around and sort of get lost. Because I think the cool thing about the Met is the range, the diversity, the sort of bewildering feeling that you can have that you leave the Cambodian galleries, the next thing you know, you're in the ancient Near Eastern galleries, and then the Egypt, and then 20th century France. And you can just feel this variety of beauty and this extraordinary range of ways that human beings have responded to this world that we're all a part of. So the first thing I recommend is just going in there and just sort of doing laps around the place. But then I do think that at some point, then quiet down, say goodbye to your partner or whatever, and spend some time alone with something that you are drawn to. And, realize that you have something to contribute to this, because you might pick something that is about something that relates to your life in some way, and be patient with it and learn from it and send your creative thoughts back at the thing and just try to have an experience that's uncommon, that's different than what you might have just, walking down the street whistling a tune or whatever.
Yeah, just the one little thing that I can add is I really liked the time I was sitting just outside the staircase. After seeing the art and then thinking about myself and what am I doing here, and just looking at the people without then thinking anything.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you.
And you probably have a hectic, busy schedule in Korea. A lot of fans are waiting for you. Yes.
I'm waiting for them too.
So, hope you have a great time in Korea.
Thank you very much. This was great fun.
I'll make sure to have a plan to visit New York City and see you play.
Please, that would be cool.